Can the new GTX 1650 Super Series be the ultimate value for 1080p gamers? Well, let's find out. Hi guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. I didn't manage to do a day one review of this card because Nvidia for some reason held back the drivers again until the official launch of the card. It's like they don't want people to know about this series. I've also noticed that there's a small amount of reviews upon its release, which is a bit odd since it's soon going to fight with AMD's budget offering RX 5500. Nevertheless, now that I finally have drivers on hand and a sample from MSI, their GTX 1650 Super Gaming X model, it's time to check out what this little thing can actually do. But before I continue talking about the performance of this card, let's see what's actually different about this series compared to its non-super brother and other surrounding, similarly priced and performing models from Nvidia's portfolio. Unlike with the GTX 1660 and GTX 1660 Super situation, the GTX 1650 Super not only that it brings faster GDDR6 video memory in relation to the regular GTX 1650 which has GDDR5 video memory, it comes with a bit above 40% more CUDA cores, 1280 versus 896, more texture units also, while the number of ROPs stayed the same. Compared to the next stronger model in their lineup above it, the GTX 1660, it has 128 CUDA cores and 8 texture units more over the GTX 1650 Super, while the number of ROPs is much larger, exactly 50%. With the GTX 1650 Super we get a bit higher GPU clock speeds compared to the GTX 1650, while although it gets that faster GDDR6 video memory, it does retain the same video memory size of 4GB and a very modest 128-bit memory bus. This proved to be crucial in terms of gaming at 1440p resolution, while 1080p resolution, as you will see later on, ends up being its sweet spot. Be sure to subscribe to my channel because I'm also going to do a comparison with the regular GTX 1650 series, which I reviewed a couple of months ago, and its generational predecessor by price, the GTX 1050 Ti, as well as for the future reviews of the GTX 1650 Super and other cards from different vendors. And if you need a reference point for the next card above it, feel free to check out my review of MSI's GTX 1660 Gaming X model in the right top corner of this video. If you came across on basically any review of Nvidia's latest graphics card generation from MSI, especially anything from their gaming series sub-brand, you'll notice that the GTX 1650 Super Gaming X isn't any different from them design-wise. We have that very recognizable looking black and grey shroud fitted on a dual slot design, which looks to be very color neutral and will go along with basically any build. I personally like it, although it's not that off the scale unique or extra looking. As it represents a more budget-oriented graphics card series, taming its price as much as possible is always preferable, which is why MSI decided to partially cut down the RGB LED lit logo on the side of the card, which is now not RGB, but it only lights up in white, while you can still control the glowing effects through MSI's Dragon Center software utility, so you're still left with some features. Another attempt to save a bit more continues on when you move to the back of the card, where it right away feels a bit strange to see an MSI Gaming Series model coming without a backplate. We now have just a clean black PCB with a white MSI Dragon logo on it. But again, since this series is on the other end of the food chain, so to speak, it's no wonder that we are missing this more to say commodity rather than a feature. Behind that plastic shroud you'll find for this GPU a pretty decent cooling setup, with a total of 3 heat pipes running through the aluminum fin stack, cooling off the GPU with a plate attached directly to them and it, while the video memory has a cold plate on it, onto which is blown the cold air from the two 85mm Torx 3.0 fans, but their cold plate is not in direct contact with the heatsink, while the 3-phase GPU power design is also covered with a part of that cold plate and it is used for cooling its VRM components, but it is in contact with the fin stack array above it thanks to these pretty thick thermal pads. To be honest, it doesn't need anything stronger than this, it's a 100W TDP GPU after all, which is easily confirmed just by taking a look at the load temperatures. On an open test bed it was running at barely 60 degrees Celsius, no matter what you did to it. Even my overclocking of it raised the temperature just by a degree or two at best, with just a slight increase of the fan's speed, while the stock idle GPU temperature was just a bit above 40 degrees Celsius, and that's with the fans being completely off since they have MSI's Zero Frozer feature. Speaking of that, this little thing has a pretty high overclocking potential, which is a slight change of scenery for me, so to speak, since lately I've been doing a lot of reviews of AMD's Navi 10 series, and with those you won't get too far with pulling the slider away from its stock position in MSI's Afterburner. I managed to bring up the GPU core clock frequency by roughly about 150 MHz, which translated into about 150 to 200 MHz of in-game frequency bump. I was seeing anywhere from 2000 to 2070 MHz instead of the regular 1850 to 1920 MHz of load frequency speed span, while the video memory frequency was overclocked from 1500 to a bit above 1820 MHz. Feel free to use my MSI Afterburner settings for overclocking this card, and if it's not stable for you, try to lower down GPU or memory speed until you get stable card's behavior and results. The card only needs one extra 6-pin PCI Express power connector for powering it up, and some of you are probably wondering or hoping to see a version of this graphics card series without any of it, but I don't think we'll see a GTX 1650 supermodel without at least one extra 6-pin PCI Express power connector, since its TDP, although low as I mentioned earlier, is around 100 watts, so the power consumption is also roughly in that realm, and powering it solely over the PCI Express lane is just not enough. I've actually managed to record around 130 watts of power consumption difference between idle and load under worst case scenario, that being the Fermac GPU stress test, so basically that's only GPU load in question, plus if you count in the few watts which are pulled in idle, that makes it a bit above that figure, and this kind of power draw is something which needs that extra power from the additional PCI Express power connector next to what can the PCI Express slot provide. If you have any questions or other concerns about this card, feel free to leave me a comment down below and I will help you out, and down there in the description box to be precise, you can also find my setup which I used here to test this GPU out, and the core components are Intel's 6-core Core i5-8600K overclocked to 5.1 GHz and 2 times 8 GB of 3000 MHz DDR4 RAM. Finally, taking a look at the performance of the card, although I also did my benchmarking runs at 1440p resolution, the focus should be on 1080p resolution, and here the GTX 1650 Super Series feels the best. You can expect smooth gaming with high framerate output, so high it could probably carry a high refresh rate 1080p gaming monitor in some of the more popular and better optimized titles. It's definitely stronger than the RX 570, and it seems like it will also trade blows with the RX 580. 1440p resolution is a bit tricky on account of the video memory size, but it's still playable and you can definitely get few frames more out of it with lowering down the graphics settings. As for that extra performance that I got with overclocking this particular sample, I was seeing roughly around 10 to 15% more compared to the stock figures, which is a pretty decent bump considering that it comes free of charge. It will only take away a few minutes of your time. One thing that MSI's gaming series is known for as long as it exists is that the noise that it makes when the card is under load is rarely noticeable, and that's on account of good cooler and fan design combination, which is once again confirmed with this model. The fan speed was roaming around 850 to 900 RPM under stock load, while under OC load it pretty much stayed the same, more on the upper end of the 900 RPM mark, but bottom line basically unnoticeable even when the card is sitting a meter away from me on an open test rig. Here's a short sound clip of the card under stock load and OC load, while also showing you the sound meter for a measurement comparison. Although most of us brushed off the GTX 1650 series as something not worth of your money taking into consider its price point and performance output that it brings to the table, With the GTX 1650 Super Series, that's a completely different story. Comparing both their MSRP launch prices, for basically a slight price bump of just few dollars more, you will get a much competent 1080p gaming workhorse compared to its brother, which makes it a no-brainer for those who are on the budget, at least as of now, and while we wait and see what AMD prepared for us with the upcoming RX 5500 series. That's it for this time from me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second to toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content, that really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe, and if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. And until then, catch you later guys.